There are moments in life when you sit across from someone you love and feel as if a glass wall has quietly slid down between you. You see their face, you hear their words, but something essential doesn't quite reach you. You go to bed next to a body that feels a million miles away, wake up to the same familiar voice, and still find yourself whispering in the dark. If you really love me, why doesn't it feel that way? This video is for that question, not the one you ask out loud, but the one that trembles silently at the bottom of your heart. For most of my life, I believed love had a clear and obvious language. I thought it was written in the phrases I had learned from movies, novels, songs late at night on the radio. I love you. I can't live without you. Grand declarations, dramatic confessions, the kinds of words that make your chest tighten and your eyes sting. But somewhere along the way, often in the quiet corners of my practice, sitting in rooms where people unwrapped their hearts, I began to notice something unsettling. Many women who sat before me were not unloved. They were loved intensely, fiercely, stubbornly. And yet they felt alone. Not because love was absent, but because it was speaking a dialect no one had taught them to hear. Carl Jung once wrote about the images and forces that shape us from the inside, the archetypes that move like ancient rivers beneath the thin ice of our everyday lives. When he spoke of the warrior in the male psyche, he was not praising violence, but pointing to an old pattern, the one who must stand alone, endure, protect, provide. A man shaped by this inner warrior does not easily lay down his weapons, even in the arms of the woman he loves. He will fight exhaustion before he admits it. He will carry despair like a secret wound rather than confess he is afraid. To ask for help feels to him not like a simple request, but like betraying some primal code carved deep into his bones. And yet the soul is stubborn. Love has its own gravity, its own insistence. No matter how armored a man believes he must be, there comes a point where his heart begins to leak through the cracks. Not in the tender phrases you might expect, not in the sweeping romantic gestures that fill social media and storybooks, but in quiet, almost invisible ways. A question slipped into an ordinary conversation. A sigh at the end of a long day. A simple remark about how you moved a chair, folded a blanket, placed a plant by a window. Little sentences that seem so mundane, you might nod and move on, never knowing that something sacred just crossed the threshold between his inner world and yours. Over time, I began to recognize these sentences as markers, like faint trail signs in a dense forest. Each one was a moment where the warrior put his sword down, even if just for a breath. Each one carried more love than a dozen rehearsed "I love you" spoken without risk. I watched women's faces soften when they finally understood what had always been in front of them. So all those years, he was trying to tell me they would ask. And somewhere inside, something tired and hopeful would answer, yes, he was, just not in the language you had been taught to listen for. There is a quiet tragedy in this misunderstanding. Men who are trying in the only way they know how to offer their hearts. Women who are aching to receive love, but whose ears have been tuned to a different music. Between them, a space filled with misread signals, missed moments, and the slow erosion of trust. Yet within that same space lies a possibility. What if you could begin to hear what you have never been taught to recognize? What if instead of demanding louder declarations, you learn to notice the subtle trembling ways the warrior begins to lay his armor at your feet? That is the journey we are taking together here. Not to diagnose or blame, not to divide men and women into enemies or strangers, but to open a new channel of listening. To walk slowly into the inner landscape where a man's love lives. Awkward, clumsy, fiercely loyal, scared to death, and to see it with new eyes. Because once you understand this hidden language, you may realize that the love you've been searching for has not been missing at all. It has simply been speaking softly, hoping you would one day turn toward it and say, "I hear you now." It begins almost always with a question so ordinary you might overlook it. What do you think? Not what should I do or can you fix this for me, but the quiet, almost hesitant invitation for your mind to step inside his. It seems like nothing. A passing question tossed between sips of coffee or during a late-night drive. Yet if you could feel the trembling beneath those 4 words, you would sense the enormity of what has just happened. For a man shaped by the archetype of the warrior asking for counsel is a radical act. It means admitting that the fortress he has built around his independence has a gate, that your wisdom, your intuition, your judgment matter deeply enough to shape his path forward. Jung wrote that the warrior's greatest fear is dependency, because to depend is to be vulnerable, and vulnerability for him has always meant danger. But when love takes root in him, something shifts. He begins to long not for solitude, but for shared guidance. He starts to see your perspective as a map of another world, one that can help him navigate his own. When he asks, "What do you think he is really saying?" I trust you to walk beside me in the decisions that make me who I am. It is not advice he seeks, but intimacy disguised as inquiry. Maria once told me that she spent 20 years believing her husband was indifferent. He was quiet, practical, not one for grand gestures. She wanted poetry and candlelight. Instead, he asked her opinion about taxes, about which color to paint the porch, about whether he should take a new job. It just felt so unromantic, she said, eyes downcast. I wanted him to tell me he loved me, not ask about his resume. And yet one evening when she finally told him, she had realized those questions were his way of saying, "I can't imagine my future without you." He broke down in tears. "I never made a decision without thinking of you," he whispered. "You've always been my compass." It is astonishing how love can hide in such plain sight. A man may never say, "You complete me," but if he asks for your thoughts on something that touches his pride, know that he already has. That small act of opening, of letting your mind touch his uncertainty, is his declaration that you have entered the inner circle of his soul. The second phrase sounds just as simple. "I had a rough day." It's the kind of thing you hear all the time, but to understand what lies beneath it, you have to look closer. When a man tells you about his struggle, he's not complaining. He's choosing to take off his armor. Jung called this moment the lowering of the shield, a sacred threshold where the warrior becomes human again. Because for men, admitting difficulty is not casual. It goes against the entire rhythm of their conditioning, the centuries-old demand to endure without flinching. There's a heaviness that enters the room when a man speaks these words truthfully. His voice softens, his eyes flicker away. The silence before and after feels thick, as though he's letting you glimpse a room he rarely enters himself. "I had a rough day" means I trust you not to turn away when I am no longer the strong one. It means you are the place where I can set down my burden even for a moment. Anna once told me how her husband would come home, slump into the armchair, and say that line every evening. She used to think he was exaggerating or fishing for sympathy. But when she began to understand that each confession was a small rebellion against everything his inner warrior believed, she stopped answering with advice. She simply listened. She touched his hand. And over time, their silences became fuller, their connection deeper. The armchair became a confessional. The phrase became a bridge. Love, you see, often hides not in grand declarations, but in these small fractures moments when a man dares to reveal the soft underside of his being. When he lets you witness the crack in his armor and trusts you not to drive the blade deeper. If you can recognize these subtle openings and meet them with presence instead of analysis, compassion instead of correction, something begins to change. The warrior starts to rest. The woman begins to see. And in that shared stillness, the real conversation, the one beyond words, finally begins. There's another moment, quieter still, when love reveals itself in the simplest observation. "I like how you arrange this." A sentence so small, it often drifts past, unnoticed, like dust caught in sunlight. Yet for a man, those words carry a quiet revolution. Jung once wrote that a man's environment, his office, his car, his study, The way he organizes his desk is not merely a physical space, but an external projection of his inner self. To allow someone to change that space is symbolically to let them rearrange a part of his identity. Most men live with an invisible border around their world, the residue of an ancient instinct to protect the territory of the self. The warrior archetype, though ancient, is not gone. It lingers in the way he locks his drawer, the way he prefers his order untouched. And yet one day he walks into the room and finds that you have moved the chair, changed the curtains, rearranged the books, and instead of defensiveness, there is softness in his eyes. I like how you arranged this. What he is really saying is, I like the way you see me. I like what your presence does to the world I inhabit. You are welcome to shape me. Lucia told me once about a man she loved who never spoke of feelings. He was calm, steady, distant. His office was his fortress, a place no one entered without permission. But one day she reorganized it while he was away, cleared. The dust changed the lighting, added a small plant near the window. When he came home, he paused at the door, took a long look, and said those 6 words. Months later, when he proposed, he said he had known in that moment that he wanted her in his life forever. Because she had touched the core of his world and he had felt at peace. It seems such a small thing, a man liking the way you fold the towels or rearrange his books, but it is the soul's quiet surrender. To accept your influence in his physical space is to accept you as part of his inner one. The material becomes metaphor. The movement of a lamp becomes the merging of 2 worlds. And then comes the next phrase, deceptively simple, yet immensely revealing. What are you doing tomorrow? At first glance, it sounds like polite curiosity. But Jung believed that for the male psyche, time itself is sacred. Space defines identity, but time defines purpose. A man plans, he advances, he protects. He moves through time like a soldier, through terrain, each hour measured, each step controlled. When he asks about your future plans, he is doing something extraordinary. He is inviting you into his timeline. When a man begins to ask not just about your present, but about your future, he is saying, I want to know where you will be when I wake up tomorrow. I want our stories to overlap. It is an unspoken way of weaving you into his forward motion. Men rarely imagine futures that include others unless their hearts have already made that quiet decision. I once met a woman named Elena who had been seeing someone for several months. He was gentle but cautious, the kind who never spoke of feelings. He always asks about my week, my plans, my meetings, she said almost dismissively. It's sweet, but kind of controlling. I asked her, does he tell you about his? She nodded slowly. Always? He likes to match our free days. She paused, eyes widening as understanding dawned. It wasn't control, it was inclusion. He was stitching her into his idea of time itself. When a man asks what you are doing tomorrow, it's not small talk, it's the soul reaching forward. He is saying, your future matters to me. I am making space for you inside mine. This is how the warrior learns tenderness, not through sudden vulnerability, but through the slow and deliberate act of planning a tomorrow that does not exist without you. And perhaps that is how love grows strongest, quietly and visibly, woven not into the words we expect, but into the moments we almost overlook. Then there is the sentence that sits at the heart of misunderstanding, the one most easily dismissed, yet the most revealing of all. I don't know what to do. On the surface, it sounds like hesitation, even weakness. But within those 6 words lies one of the most intimate declarations a man can ever make. For the warrior within him, certainty is not just a preference, it is survival. To hesitate is to expose his flank. To admit confusion is to risk defeat. His lineage, whether he wears armor or a suit, has trained him to always know, always act, always lead. So when he finally sits beside you, shoulders heavy, and whispers, I don't know what to do, he is breaking an ancient vow. He is showing you the side of himself the world is never allowed to see. In that moment, he is not the provider, the planner, the unshakable one. He is simply human, bare trembling, seeking not rescue, but refuge. What he is really saying is, I trust you with the parts of me that feel lost. He is asking you not to guide him, but to see him, to hold space for the man beneath the armor. Paula told me about the night her husband spoke those words. He had always been decisive, the kind of man who built things with his hands and never asked for help. But after a business failure, he sat on the couch, his palms pressed to his eyes, and murmured, "I don't know what to do." She panicked. How could he not know? She thought he was supposed to be the strong one, and so she hid her fear behind practicality, offering solutions, advice, pep talks. None of it reached him. Over the next months, something fragile in their marriage began to crack. It was only much later, sitting in the soft light of a therapist's office, that she understood. That moment had been his surrender, not to defeat, but to love. He wasn't asking her to fix the problem. He was asking her to sit in the darkness with him until dawn returned. When she told him this years later, he wept. He had felt utterly alone in that silence, even as she spoke beside him, because all he had wanted was for her to see him, not to save him. Jung believed that when a man reveals uncertainty, he touches the edge of his own transformation. The warrior sets down his weapon and begins to encounter his soul. And if love meets him, they're not with impatience or fear, but with gentle presence, then something extraordinary happens. He learns that he can be both protector and pilgrim, both strong and unsure, and still worthy of love. The tragedy is that many men never experience this kind of acceptance. The moment they falter, they feel judged, sometimes not by words, but by silence, by the flicker of disappointment in a partner's eyes. They withdraw, retreating into the safety of solitude. And there, behind the mask of competence, they grow quieter, colder, more distant. Not because they stopped loving, but because they learned that love was safest when hidden. But if in that fragile instant you can meet a man's uncertainty with softness, with a simple, "Thank you for sharing this with me. I know that wasn't easy," then you are offering him something no battlefield or boardroom ever could: sanctuary. Not a solution, but a safe place to feel. In that space, love grows roots deeper than passion, roots that bind two souls beyond the reach of fear. When a man says, "I don't know what to do," and you stay listening, breathing, patient, you are not watching his weakness, you are witnessing his courage. You are seeing him become whole. Sometimes love speaks in fragments of memory. "You made me think about," he says almost offhandedly, and you might smile, not realizing that what he just revealed is something far greater than a casual thought. For most men, their attention is compartmentalized. Their minds move in straight lines, task, mission, result. To be distracted by affection, to have someone appear in their thoughts unbidden, means she has crossed an invisible threshold from the outer world into the inner one. When he tells you that you made him think about something, he's saying, "You live in my consciousness even when I'm alone." Jung believed that the deepest form of love is psychic integration, the merging of one soul's presence into another's unconscious life. It isn't about obsession or dependency. It's about resonance. It means that your voice, your laughter, your perspective begin to echo in the quiet chambers of his mind. He passes a cafe and thinks of how you like your coffee. He hears a song and recalls the way you hummed along in the car. He sees a book and remembers something you once said about the author. Small, fleeting connections, but together they form the map of how love rewires perception itself. Teresa once told me she never thought her husband was romantic. He didn't give flowers or write love notes, but he would come home from errands and say things like, "I saw that little shop that sells the scarves you like," or "I thought of you when I saw this painting." She used to nod politely, not realizing he was describing the constancy of her presence in his inner world. Years later, when she finally asked, "Do you really think of me that much?" he looked surprised. "Of course," he said. "You're everywhere in my head." It was only then that she understood the depth of that simple phrase. To be remembered in the midst of distraction is no small thing. In the male psyche, where compartmentalization is instinctive, to think of you without prompting is an act of devotion. It means his mind has ceased to be entirely his own. You have become the quiet companion of his solitude, the unseen witness to his ordinary hours. And when he chooses to tell you this, when he says, "You made me think about," it is a window into his private landscape, an invitation to step inside. If you meet that invitation with curiosity instead of dismissal, if you ask, "What made you think of me?" you open a rare passageway between two worlds. You enter the terrain of his imagination where logic gives way to tenderness. Jung might have said that in such moments, the soul of a relationship breathes. Two minds long trained to operate separately begin to weave a shared consciousness. That is the essence of intimacy, not physical closeness alone, but the feeling that another being has taken up residence within your thoughts and that you within theirs. And then finally, there is the seventh sentence, the one that completes the circle of love's hidden language. Do you think we should? When a man says we, something profound has already occurred. Jung wrote that the shift from I to we is the symbolic death of the solitary hero and the birth of the partner. For the warrior archetype, it is the ultimate surrender. To think in terms of we means he has allowed his identity to expand beyond his own boundaries. It is not just semantics, it is psychological transformation. He is no longer navigating the world alone. He says, "Do you think we should get a dog, move to another city, visit your parents this weekend?" And each time, that single word, we as a confession. You are part of my decisions now. My future is not mine without you. When you hear this, pause for a moment. Listen beneath the words. What you are hearing is the final stage of the warrior's journey, not victory, not conquest, but integration. The moment when he sets down his sword for good and begins to build a life, not a fortress. Love, in the end, is not a grand announcement. It is the quiet weaving of two souls into a rhythm the world rarely notices. When a man says, "Do you think we should?" he is already speaking from that rhythm. He has learned that love is not a battlefield or a performance, but a shared ground where identity softens and the self becomes plural. The man who once saw life as a solitary mission now begins to see through the eyes of togetherness. His future thoughts automatically bend toward you. His decisions carry your invisible weight, and the pronoun we slips from his mouth, not as effort, but as instinct. This is the transformation Jung spoke of, the moment when consciousness expands beyond the borders of the self. The warrior, who once measured strength by solitude, now measures it by unity. He is no longer driven by the need to conquer or to prove, but by the desire to preserve connection, to build something enduring out of vulnerability. The I dissolves into partnership, and through that surrender, he becomes whole. For many women, recognizing this transformation requires an inner shift as well. We are taught to listen for romance in music, to expect declarations that sound like poetry. But love, when it matures, begins to speak in prose. It shows itself in habits, in the small courtesies of daily life, in the way someone says we without thinking. And if you can learn to hear that music within the ordinary, you will realize that love has been speaking to you all along, quietly, faithfully, without applause. To love a man truly is to learn to see the courage behind his restraint, the tenderness inside his logic, the language written in his silences. To love him is to understand that the deepest emotions often come dressed as simplicity. What do you think means "I need your guidance"? "I had a rough day" means "I trust you with my weariness." "I like how you arrange this" means "I'm letting you shape who I am." "What are you doing tomorrow" means "I'm inviting you into my time." "I don't know what to do" means "I'm showing you my truest self." "You made me think about" means "you live in me even when you're not here." And "do you think we should?" means there is no longer a me without you. Jung believed that every soul seeks integration of its opposites, its shadows, its longings. In love, this integration happens not through perfection, but through seeing. When a woman begins to hear a man's emotional language without demanding that it sound like her own, she becomes the mirror through which he discovers his humanity. And when he in turn learns to see her emotional fluency not as mystery, but as guidance, Something sacred unfolds between them, a shared consciousness where both are finally understood. In the silence that follows, love no longer needs translation. It simply is. Two people speaking different dialects of the same truth, finding that beneath all the words and misunderstandings, their souls were already fluent in each other. If even one of these phrases has ever crossed the space between you and a man you love, know this: you have already touched the sacred heart of his devotion. You have been living inside the very language you thought you had lost. You only needed to listen differently. So tonight, perhaps pause before asking for more proof, more poetry, more noise. Sit in the quiet and remember the subtle ways love has already spoken to you. Sometimes, the truest "I love you" is hidden inside an ordinary question, whispered in the softest voice, waiting patiently for you to hear it. If this reflection touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who may need to understand love in a new way. Like this video, subscribe for more reflections like this, and leave a comment about which moment or sentence resonated with your heart. Because every story of love we share helps someone else learn how to listen again.